Zara Fletcher felt the city's chill deep in her bones. It wasn't just the autumn air that crept through the cracked window pane of her small apartment. It was a different kind of cold. The cold of loneliness. The cold of an empty bank account. The cold of a future that seemed to shrink with every passing day. She was 24 years old, but she felt ancient, worn down by a life that had taken far more than it had given. She was tired. She was hungry. She was alone. Her mother's photograph sat on the wobbly nightstand, the only piece of furniture in the bedroom besides a mattress on the floor. In the picture, her mother was smiling, her eyes full of the light that Zara missed more than air itself. It had been 6 months since the cancer had won. 6 months since Zara's world had fractured into a million tiny, sharp pieces. The grief was a constant weight, a shadow that followed her from the moment she woke up to the moment she collapsed into a fitful sleep. With her mother's passing came the bills, a mountain of them. Hospital stays, treatments, medications, paper ghosts that haunted her mailbox, each one a reminder of her failure to save the one person who mattered most. She had been a promising engineering student, her mind sharp and her dreams big. She had wanted to build things, create things that would help people, but she had dropped out of college to care for her mother, promising herself she would go back. That promise now felt like a cruel joke. The debt was a chain around her ankles, pulling her deeper into a life she had never envisioned for herself. A life of serving lukewarm coffee and greasy eggs at a diner downtown, her hands raw from hot water and cleaning chemicals, her smile a mask she put on with her uniform. This morning, the final notice had been taped to her door, a bright, aggressive red, the color of alarm. Eviction. 14 days. The words swam before her eyes. 14 days to find money she did not have. 14 days until she and her mother's photograph would be out on the street. She slid down the door, the rough wood scraping her back, and held the notice in her trembling hands. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She took a deep breath, then another, forcing the air into her tight lungs. Crying wouldn't help. It never did. She stood up, her movements stiff. She had to get to work. Her shift started in an hour. She looked around the sparse apartment. A small kitchen with a leaking faucet. A living room with a threadbare couch she'd found on the curb. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was the last place she had been with her mother. The thought of losing it was a physical pain, a fresh stab of grief in her already wounded heart. She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. A half-empty carton of milk, a single egg, a plastic container with leftover rice from 2 days ago. That was it. She closed the door, her stomach rumbling in protest. She would eat at the diner. Maybe. If there were any leftover scraps that her boss, Mr. Henderson, didn't claim for himself. She made a mental calculation. The tips from yesterday came to $12.47. That had to last her. For what? Food? The bus? A miracle? Despite the gnawing emptiness inside her, Zara performed a small ritual, a habit her mother had instilled in her. She pulled a small, worn notebook from a drawer. On the cover, in her mother's elegant script, were the words, "Find the light." Each day, no matter how dark, her mother had insisted they write down one good thing, one small moment of grace. Zara opened it to a blank page. Her hand hovered, the pen feeling heavy. What good could she possibly find today? The eviction notice? The empty fridge? The crushing weight of her own despair? She closed her eyes, and an image surfaced. On her walk home last night, a stray cat, thin and matted, had been huddled by the dumpster. Zara had taken the last of her milk and poured it into a discarded lid. The cat had lapped it up gratefully, its small purr a tiny engine of hope in the dark alley. It wasn't much. It was almost nothing. But it was something. She wrote it down. The cat purred. A tear escaped and splashed onto the page, smudging the ink. She wiped it away, her resolve hardening. She would not break. Her mother had faced death with courage. She could face this. She put on her uniform, the cheap polyester scratching against her skin. She checked her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. Her skin, once vibrant, was pale. She forced a smile. It didn't reach her eyes. It was a stranger's smile, a survivor's smile, good enough for the customers at the diner. She grabbed her thin jacket, her purse with its $12.47, and walked out the door, the red notice a silent, mocking witness to her departure. The alley behind her apartment building was a narrow channel of forgotten things, overflowing dumpsters, broken furniture, the lingering smell of decay. It was a shortcut she rarely took, but today she felt the need to avoid the main street, to hide from the world a little longer, and that's when she saw him for the first time. An old man, his clothes little more than layered rags, his beard a wild gray tangle. He was sitting on an overturned bucket, surrounded by a strange collection of junk. Discarded computer monitors, twisted wires, pieces of scrap metal, old car batteries. He was focused, his gnarled hands working with a surprising dexterity, twisting a copper wire around a piece of jagged metal. He didn't look up as she passed. He seemed to be in his own world, a world made of other people's trash. Zara hesitated for a moment. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Everyone has a story, Zara. You just have to be willing to listen. But fear, a practical and necessary instinct, kept her moving. The city had taught her to be wary, to keep her head down and mind her own business. She hurried on, the image of the man and his strange project lingering in her mind. Over the next few days, the man was always there. He became a fixed point in her daily journey of survival. She saw him in the early morning, already at work as she left for the diner. She saw him in the late evening, still tinkering under the dim glow of a single flickering street lamp as she returned, her body aching. He never spoke. He never asked for anything. He just built. His creation was growing, taking on a bizarre, intricate shape. It looked like a nest of metal and glass, a chaotic sculpture of forgotten technology. Her neighbors started to complain. "He's a menace," grumbled Mr. Schmidt from 3B, a man whose primary hobby was peering through his blinds. "He's attracting rats. I've seen them." "Someone should call the police," added Mrs. Gable from across the hall, clutching her small, yapping dog. "It's not safe. People like that are unpredictable. He's probably crazy." The landlord, a portly man named Mr. Hayes, put up a notice in the lobby. "Vagrancy in the alley is strictly prohibited. Trespassers will be reported to the authorities." The message was clear. The man was not welcome. He was a problem to be removed, an inconvenience to be erased. The warnings from her neighbors and the landlord echoed the city's unwritten rules. Don't get involved. Look the other way. Protect yourself. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing to do. One afternoon, a cold rain began to fall. A miserable, persistent drizzle that soaked everything and everyone. As Zara walked home, her cheap jacket offering little protection, she saw the old man in the alley. He was trying to cover his strange machine with a flimsy piece of cardboard, but the rain was relentless. The cardboard was sagging, turning to pulp. The man himself was soaked, shivering, but his focus remained on protecting his work. Something inside Zara snapped. It was the quiet desperation in his posture, the fierce, hopeless way he tried to shield his creation. She saw her father in him, a man who would spend hours in the garage, lost in his own projects, his hands covered in grease, a look of pure joy on his face. She saw the same passion in this forgotten man in the alley. She thought of the $12 in her purse. It was her food money for the next 2 days. It was her bus fare. It was all she had. Her mind screamed at her, "Walk away. You can't afford this. You can't save the world." But her heart, the part of her that still remembered her mother's lessons, that still believed in finding the light, had a different idea. She turned and walked to the corner hardware store. A heavy-duty blue tarp was hanging in the window. The price tag read $9.99. It felt like a fortune. It was a fortune. It was a choice between her own hunger and a stranger's comfort. She stood in the rain for a full minute, the cold water dripping down her face, mingling with tears she didn't realize she was crying. Fear and hesitation warred with a powerful, undeniable pull of empathy. Then she remembered the cat's purr. A small act of kindness that had cost her almost nothing but had given her a reason to write in her notebook. What would this act cost? What would it give? She walked into the store. The transaction was quick. The $10 bill she handed over felt warm in her hand, a final connection to her own security. The coin she got back as change felt cold and insignificant. She walked back to the alley, her heart pounding. The man was still there, his battle against the rain a losing one. She approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. He looked up, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were not cloudy or vacant as she had expected. They were a brilliant, piercing blue, full of a startling intelligence. They were the eyes of a man who saw the world in a different way. I thought this might help," she stammered, holding out the folded tarp. He looked at the tarp, then back at her. He didn't speak. A long moment passed. She felt a flush of embarrassment, thinking she had made a mistake, that he would reject her offer. But then, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He reached out a hand, not to take the tarp, but to gesture toward his machine. It was an invitation. Together, in the cold, driving rain, they draped the blue tarp over the strange metal nest. They secured the corners with loose bricks from a crumbling wall. The machine was now safe, protected from the elements. When they were done, the man looked at her, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He still didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volumes. They said, "Thank you." Zara returned to her apartment, soaked and shivering, her stomach empty, her purse nearly so. But she didn't feel poor. For the first time in a long time, she felt rich. She opened her notebook. The page was still damp. She wrote, "I bought a stranger a tarp. We saved his machine from the rain." It was more than a good moment. It was a victory. The next morning, she brought him a coffee from the diner. She had paid for it herself. It was a simple black coffee in a paper cup. She set it down on the bucket beside him. He nodded his thanks and took a sip, his eyes never leaving his work. This became their new ritual. Every morning she brought him coffee. Every evening she would check to see if the tarp was secure. They never spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. There was a quiet understanding between them, a silent partnership forged in a forgotten alley. She was protecting his work. He, in his own strange way, was giving her a purpose beyond her own survival. He was her reason to find the light. But their quiet world was about to be shattered. The city had other plans for the alley, plans that involved money, power, and a man who had no room in his world for kindness or for people he considered trash. The day it happened started like any other. Zara was on her way home from a grueling 10-hour shift, her feet throbbing, her mind numb with exhaustion. As she turned the corner toward her building, she saw them. A crowd, bright lights, cameras. A fleet of black town cars was parked along the curb. In the center of it all, standing at the entrance to the alley, was a man in an impeccably tailored suit. He was handsome in a severe, arrogant way, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his voice loud and booming. This was Marcus Thorne, a name synonymous with luxury developments and ruthless business tactics. He was the king of gentrification, a man who saw neighborhoods not as communities, but as properties to be flipped. He was giving an interview to a local news crew. "This blighted alley," he proclaimed, gesturing with a dismissive wave of his hand, "will be transformed. It will become the grand entrance to the Thorne Excelsior, a beacon of progress and prosperity for this community." Zara's blood ran cold. The alley. His alley. The old man's workshop. She pushed her way through the small crowd of onlookers. And there he was. Elias, as she had started to call him in her mind, was standing defensively in front of his tarp-covered creation. 2 burly security guards were trying to move him, but he stood his ground, a frail but unyielding figure. Marcus Thorne finished his interview and turned his attention to the problem. His polished smile vanished, replaced by a sneer of disgust. "What is this?" he barked, striding into the alley. "Get this filth out of here. Now!" The security guards grabbed Elias's arms more forcefully. "Sir, you need to leave the premises," one of them said, his voice a low growl. "No," Elias said. It was the first word Zara had ever heard him speak. His voice was raspy from disuse, but firm. Thorne laughed, a short, ugly sound. "No? Did you hear that? The bum says no." He walked right up to Elias, his expensive shoes inches from the old man's worn boots. "This is private property, or it will be, as soon as I clear out the trash. That includes you. And this pile of garbage." He kicked at the tarp, his polished shoe connecting with the metal structure beneath. A loud clang echoed through the alley. Elias flinched as if he had been struck himself. That was when Zara moved. She didn't think. She just acted. She pushed past the security guards and stood between Thorne and Elias. "Stop it!" she yelled, her voice trembling but clear. "Leave him alone." Thorne's eyes, cold and gray as concrete, shifted to her. He looked her up and down, taking in her worn diner uniform, her frayed jacket, her exhausted face. His lip curled in contempt. "And who are you? His social worker? Look at this, everyone," he announced to the crowd and the still rolling cameras. "The trash has found an advocate. How touching." Laughter rippled through some of the onlookers. Others just stared, their phones held up to record the unfolding drama. Zara felt a hot flush of shame and anger. She was being judged, dismissed, humiliated, all because of how she looked, all because she chose to defend a man everyone else had written off. "He's not bothering anyone," Zara said, her voice gaining strength. "This is his work. It's important to him." "Important?" Thorne scoffed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off a few $100 bills and threw them on the ground at Zara's feet. They fluttered in the dirty alley, landing in a puddle of murky water. "Here," he sneered. "Take your bum friend and go get a hot meal. Get a new life. Just get out of my development." The act was so demeaning, so utterly contemptuous, it stole the air from her lungs. She stared at the money floating in the filth. It was more than she had in the world. It could pay her rent. It could solve her problems. But accepting it would mean accepting his judgment. It would mean agreeing that she and Elias were nothing, that they could be bought and dismissed. "We don't want your money," she said, her voice shaking with rage. Thorne's face darkened. His manufactured charm evaporated, revealing the raw ugliness beneath. "You have no right to be here. Neither of you." He snapped his fingers at his security team. "Get them out, and tear down this pile of junk. I want it gone in 5 minutes." The guards moved in again. One grabbed Zara's arm, his fingers digging into her skin. The other lunged for Elias. Zara struggled, but the guard was a mountain of a man. She felt powerless, her feet dragging on the pavement as he started to pull her away. She watched in horror as the other guard ripped the blue tarp off Elias's machine. The creation was revealed. It was a complex lattice of wires, circuit boards, and strange, glowing cylinders. It hummed with a low, latent energy. It was bizarre, but it was also beautiful, a testament to hundreds of hours of painstaking work. Thorne stared at it for a second, then let out a derisive laugh. "He built a bomb? Get this thing out of here before it explodes." "It's not a bomb," Zara cried out, struggling against the guard. It's a power cell, a new kind of battery." She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Her engineering mind, dormant for so long, recognized the patterns, the logic in the chaos. "A battery?" Thorne laughed even harder. "This rat-infested alley is the new frontier of energy, is it? You're both delusional." He pulled out his phone. "I've had enough of this. I'm calling the police. I'll have you both arrested for trespassing and assault." He made the call, his voice dripping with smug authority. Zara's heart sank. Arrested. A criminal record. Her last shred of hope for a future, for getting back to school, would be gone. She would lose everything. She looked at Elias. His face was a mask of despair as he watched the guards begin to dismantle his life's work. She had tried to help. She had tried to do the right thing. And this was her reward. Public humiliation, defeat, despair. The crowd watched, silent and passive, their phones like a wall of unblinking, judgmental eyes. She was at her lowest point, a victim in a spectacle of cruelty, broadcast for the world to see. But what she didn't know, what Marcus Thorne couldn't possibly imagine, was that the world was watching in more ways than one. And everything was about to change. Just as the first police car, its sirens wailing, turned the corner, another procession appeared from the opposite direction. It was not a single car, but a fleet of them. 3 gleaming black sedans with tinted windows, the kind that spoke of serious money and silent power. They moved with a quiet, menacing grace, pulling to a halt and effectively blockading the street. The news crew, sensing a bigger story, swung their cameras toward the new arrivals. The crowd murmured, their attention shifting. Marcus Thorne looked annoyed. "Who the hell is this? My security team will handle it." But the doors of the lead sedan opened before any security could approach. A woman stepped out. She was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit that radiated authority. She was a black woman, her hair styled in elegant locks, her expression sharp and intelligent. She was followed by 2 men in equally sharp suits, both carrying briefcases. They moved with a purpose that made Thorne's hired muscle look like clumsy amateurs. The woman's eyes scanned the scene, the police car, Thorne's indignant posture, the half-dismantled machine, and Zara being held by a security guard. Her gaze lingered on Zara for a moment with an unreadable expression before settling on the old man. Her entire demeanor changed. Her face softened with a look of profound respect and relief. She walked past Thorne as if he were a piece of furniture, her heels clicking decisively on the pavement. She approached Elias, who was watching her with his piercing blue eyes. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice a calm, clear bell in the chaotic alley. "Thank goodness. We've been trying to reach you for days." Thorne, who had started to bark a command at the woman, froze mid-syllable. The name hung in the air, electric and impossible. Vance. He blinked, his brain struggling to connect the name to the ragged old man in front of him. The woman, oblivious to Thorne's shock, continued. "I'm Adira Sterling, from your legal team. Apple's final offer came through this morning. They've met all your conditions. The board has unanimously approved the acquisition." The silence in the alley was absolute. The news camera zoomed in on Elias's face. The murmuring crowd fell quiet. Even the police officers, who had just gotten out of their car, stood still, sensing they had walked into something far above their pay grade. Thorne's face, which had been flushed with arrogant anger, began to drain of all color. It went from red to pink to a sickly, pale white. "Vance?" he stammered, the word a choked whisper. "Elias Vance, the founder of Kronos Corporation?" Ms. Sterling finally turned to look at him, her eyes cold and dismissive. "You know of him, then?" It was a statement, not a question. Everyone in the tech world knew of Elias Vance. He was a myth, a ghost, a legendary genius who had founded Kronos Corp 30 years ago, created a series of revolutionary patents, and then vanished from public life, living as a recluse while his company, run by a trusted board, continued to operate in secrecy. Rumors had been swirling for months that Kronos had finally cracked the holy grail of technology, a stable, hyper-efficient, organic energy cell, a battery that could last for weeks, charge in seconds, and was completely biodegradable. It was a technology that would change the world, and Apple was reportedly willing to pay billions for it. Thorne's mind reeled. The junk pile, the bomb, the battery. He looked from the complex machine to the old man, and finally, to the $100 bills lying in the dirty puddle at Zara's feet. The scale of his mistake, of his spectacular public misjudgment, crashed down on him. His knees literally buckled. He stumbled back a step, his hand flying to his chest as if to keep his heart from exploding. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his silver hair suddenly looking limp and pathetic. That can't be," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He's a bum." Elias Vance looked at Thorne, his blue eyes holding no malice, only a kind of weary disappointment. He then turned his gaze to Zara, who was still being held by the guard. Ms. Sterling followed his gaze. Her expression hardened into cold fury. "Let go of her," she commanded the security guard. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the unshakable weight of absolute authority. The guard, who a moment ago had been manhandling Zara, instantly released her arm as if it were red hot. He took a step back, suddenly looking terrified. Zara rubbed her arm, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Elias Vance? Kronos Corp? Apple? None of it made sense. She looked at the old man she had brought coffee to, the man she had protected. He was a billionaire? A genius? Ms. Sterling walked over to Zara, her expression softening again. "Are you all right, miss?" she asked. Zara could only nod, words failing her. Just then, the second black sedan's door opened. A man in a familiar black turtleneck and jeans stepped out. He wasn't Steve Jobs, but he was the next best thing. David Chen, Apple's senior vice president of hardware engineering. His presence confirmed the impossible. The news crew gasped. This wasn't a local story anymore. This was global. Chen strode into the alley, his eyes fixed on the humming machine. He ignored Thorne completely. He approached the device with the reverence of a pilgrim at a shrine. "Is that it, Elias?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "The Kronos cell?" "It is," Elias Vance said, his voice stronger now. "Or the prototype, at least. I couldn't get the final resonance calibration right in the lab. Too sterile. I needed background radiation, the chaos of the city, the ambient energy of human life." He gestured around the dirty alley. This was the perfect laboratory. David Chen knelt, examining the intricate wiring. "It's beautiful," he whispered. He looked up at Elias. "The deal is done. $9 billion. The board signed off an hour ago. $9 billion. The number echoed in the alley, a shockwave that sent the crowd into a frenzy of whispers. Marcus Thorne made a small, strangled sound, like a dying animal. His entire project, his grand Excelsior Tower, was built on land that was now adjacent to the site of the biggest tech acquisition of the decade. And he had just tried to bulldoze it. He had just assaulted the man at the center of it all. Thorne's political life, his career, his reputation. He could feel it all turning to dust. He saw the mayor, who had been standing on the sidewalk for the photo op, now talking frantically into his phone, his face a mask of panic. He saw his own investors in the crowd, their faces turning from admiration to pure fury. He was finished. The power dynamic had not just been inverted, it had been obliterated in a single cataclysmic moment. The man he had called trash held the future in his hands. And he, Marcus Thorne, was the one who was about to be thrown away. The arrival of David Chen, the Apple executive, acted as a catalyst. The scene, already tense, erupted into a new level of controlled chaos. Chen, after his moment of reverence for the Kronos cell, stood up and faced Elias Vance. "Elias," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent alley. "The acquisition is for Kronos Corp and all its assets. That includes this prototype. And frankly, this is the most important asset of all." He then turned his gaze, cold and sharp, directly onto Marcus Thorne. "And who are you?" Chen asked, though it was clear from his expression he already knew, and despised the answer. Before Thorne could stammer out a response, the mayor, a portly politician named Bill DeWitt, scurried into the alley. His face was slick with sweat, his earlier jovial mood replaced with sheer terror. He had been there for a routine photo op, a chance to align himself with Thorne's shiny new development. Now he was caught in the blast radius of a public relations nuclear bomb. "David, Mr. Chen, a pleasure," DeWitt said, extending a clammy hand that Chen pointedly ignored. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Chen repeated, his voice dangerously low. "I saw the live feed on my way over. My entire team did. I saw your associate, Mr. Thorne, assault a man who is arguably one of the most important inventors of our time. I saw him attempt to destroy a piece of technology worth billions of dollars. And I saw him publicly humiliate this young woman for the crime of showing basic human decency." He gestured toward Zara. The mayor looked at Thorne with pure venom. Thorne's career was over, and now DeWitt was desperately trying to sever himself from the sinking ship. "Marcus Thorne is not my associate," he declared loudly, for the benefit of the news cameras. "He is a private developer. The city was merely here to observe the preliminary site clearing. His actions are his own, and they are disgraceful. Appalling." Thorne looked at the mayor, his eyes pleading. He had donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to DeWitt's campaign. They had played golf together just last week. But he saw no mercy in the mayor's eyes, only ruthless political calculation. Adira Sterling, the lawyer, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the mayor's blustering. "Mr. Mayor," she said, "Mr. Thorne's actions may be more than just disgraceful. He announced his intention to seize and destroy this property." She pointed to the Kronos cell. "Given that this is a multi-billion-dollar piece of proprietary technology, his actions could be construed as attempted corporate espionage and destruction of private assets. That is a federal offense." The two police officers, who had been standing by awkwardly, suddenly snapped to attention. The words "federal offense" had a way of clarifying things. Their focus shifted entirely from Elias and Zara to the pale, sweating developer. "Furthermore," Ms. Sterling continued, her voice like ice, "Mr. Thorne's company, Thorne Developments, is the primary contractor for this project. Our preliminary research, conducted as part of the due diligence for this acquisition, has uncovered numerous financial irregularities in his city contracts. Bid rigging, kickbacks. I believe the district attorney's office will be very interested to see our files." She held up her briefcase. "I have a copy right here." That was the final nail in the coffin. Mayor DeWitt took a decisive step away from Thorne, creating a physical and political chasm between them. "Marcus Thorne," the mayor announced, his voice booming with false righteousness, "in light of this abhorrent behavior and these serious allegations, your contracts with the city are hereby suspended, effective immediately. You are fired." Thorne let out a gasp. "Bill, you can't." "Officer," the mayor said, pointing a trembling finger at his former friend, "this man has committed assault. You all saw it. And based on what this lawyer is saying, he may have committed far worse. Do your duty." The police officers, now on solid ground, approached Thorne. "Sir, you need to come with us." Thorne, defeated and broken, offered no resistance. As the officer put the handcuffs on him, the clicking sound loud in the silent alley, he looked over at Zara. He looked at the woman in the cheap diner uniform whom he had tried to crush under his heel. He had thrown money at her feet, called her trash, and now she stood next to a billionaire and a top Apple executive, watching his entire world crumble. His downfall was absolute, his humiliation complete, all captured by the same cameras he had invited to witness his triumph. With Thorne being led away, a strange calm fell over the scene. Elias Vance finally turned his full attention to Zara. He looked at her with his piercing blue eyes, and for the first time he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that transformed his weathered face. "I never got to thank you," he said, his voice gentle. "For the coffee, for the tarp, for standing up for a crazy old man in an alley." You're not crazy," Zara managed to say. "I knew you were building something important." "More important than you know," Elias said. He looked at the dismantled pieces of his machine, then at David Chen. "We need to get this to the lab in Cupertino. But first—" He paused, his gaze sweeping over the alley, the crowd, and finally settling back on Zara. He seemed to be thinking, calculating. Then he asked a simple question that would once again change everything. "Miss Sterling, what do you think we should do about this alley?" Mr. Thorne wanted to turn it into a grand entrance. Ms. Sterling looked at Zara. "I think we should ask Miss Fletcher. She seems to have a better sense of what this community needs." Everyone looked at Zara. The cameras, the executives, the crowd. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer invisible. She was, in that moment, the most powerful person in the alley. She felt a surge of confidence, a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She looked at the grimy brick walls, the dumpsters, the place where she had performed a small act of kindness that had started this incredible chain of events. She spoke, her voice clear and steady, not with a speech of vengeance against Thorne, but with the simple, unwavering truth of her own character. People just want a place to belong, she said. A place to create things and feel safe. Everyone deserves that. Not just the people who can afford to live in a luxury tower. Her words hung in the air, a simple and profound moral statement. David Chen nodded slowly. Elias Vance beamed. A ripple of applause started in the crowd. It began with one or two people, then grew, swelling into a wave of thunderous cheering. They weren't just clapping for the downfall of a bully. They were clapping for her courage, for her kindness. They were clapping for the virtuous underdog who had, against all odds, won. The aftermath of Marcus Thorne's public implosion was swift and decisive. As he was placed in the back of the police car, his face a ghostly white against the dark interior, the alley transformed from a scene of conflict into a scene of quiet, momentous change. The news reporters, buzzing with the story of a lifetime, kept their cameras rolling, capturing every second. Elias Vance, no longer a forgotten old man but a titan of industry in ragged clothes, turned to Zara. The entire world seemed to fade away, the crowd and the executives becoming a blurry backdrop to the quiet intensity of his gaze. "Zara Fletcher," he said, tasting her name as if learning a new and important word. "You have a good heart and a sharp eye. You said you knew it was a power cell." Zara nodded, still overwhelmed. "The resonance coils, the crystalline matrix. It looked like schematics I studied, before I had to drop out of college." "You studied engineering?" Elias asked, his interest piqued. "I did," she said softly. "It was my dream." Elias's smile widened. "Dreams shouldn't die in diners, Miss Fletcher." He turned to David Chen. "David, our acquisition agreement. There's a clause in there, Section 7, subsection B. The key personnel clause. I want to make an addendum." Chen raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You're the majority shareholder until the ink is dry, Elias. What's the addendum?" "I want to add Zara Fletcher to the executive team of the new Kronos division at Apple," Elias declared. "As Director of Community Integration and Ethical Innovation, her first task will be to oversee the foundation we are about to establish." Zara's jaw dropped. Director, Apple, Foundation. The words spun in her head, refusing to form a coherent thought. "But I don't have a degree. I work in a diner." "You have something more important than a degree," Elias said firmly. "You have integrity, you have compassion, you have courage. In my experience, those are much harder to find. We can teach you the business. You will teach us how to be better humans." He then looked at Adira Sterling. "Ms. Sterling, I believe we also discussed my compensation package." "Yes, Mr. Vance," the lawyer replied, pulling a file from her briefcase. "A significant portion is to be allocated to a philanthropic endeavor of your choosing." "Excellent," Elias said. "We will call it the Fletcher Foundation. Its mission will be to combat homelessness and fund grassroots innovation in underserved communities. People like me," he said with a wry smile, "who are building the future out of trash in alleys. We will seed it with an initial endowment." He paused, looking directly at Zara. "Let's make it $89 million. $89 million. The number from the story's headline. Not his payment, but hers to control." Zara felt her knees go weak. She swayed, and for a second, she thought she would faint. David Chen put a steadying hand on her shoulder. The crowd, hearing the announcement, erupted in another wave of cheers, louder this time. But Elias wasn't finished. He saw the eviction notice that had fallen from Zara's pocket during the scuffle, its angry red ink stark against the grimy pavement. He bent down and picked it up. He read it, his expression hardening. "This will not do," he said quietly. He handed the notice to one of his assistants. "Clear all of this young woman's debts. All of them. The medical bills, the student loans, everything. And buy her building. The whole thing. I want her to have the deed, free and clear, by the end of the day. No one will ever threaten her home again." He then turned to his legal team. "I also want a full accounting of Thorne Developments. I want him ruined. I want every dirty deal he ever made brought into the light. His wife will divorce him. His partners will abandon him. He will lose everything he built on the backs of people he stepped on. I want justice to be absolute." His voice was cold, a stark contrast to the warmth he showed Zara. It was the voice of a man who could move mountains and destroy them. Ms. Sterling nodded. "Consider it done, Mr. Vance." Elias's attention returned to Zara, his face softening once more. "Now, for the immediate problem." He gestured to her worn-out uniform. "You look tired and hungry, and I believe you are owed a great deal of back pay for all that coffee you brought me." He had one of his team produce a checkbook. He wrote in it, his hand surprisingly steady. He tore out the check and handed it to her. Zara looked down at it. Her vision was blurry with tears. The name on the check was Zara Fletcher. The amount was for $250,000. The memo line read simply, "For the coffee." She looked up, speechless, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying from sadness or despair anymore. She was crying from a joy so overwhelming, so profound, it felt like her heart would burst. It was the joy of vindication. The relief of a burden lifted. The shock of a life changed in an instant. Within hours, her world was remade. A black car, far nicer than the ones that had brought the executives, whisked her away from the alley. She was not taken to her grim apartment, but to a suite at the Four Seasons, with instructions to rest and order anything she wanted. While she was there, a team, directed by Elias Vance's staff, descended on her life. Her broken-down car was towed away, and a brand-new, reliable one appeared in its place in the hotel garage. Her apartment, which she now owned, was visited by a cleaning crew and then by a team of designers and movers. When she returned that evening, she walked into a home she didn't recognize. The leaking faucet was fixed. The walls were freshly painted. The rooms were filled with beautiful, comfortable furniture. The refrigerator and pantry were stocked to bursting with fresh, healthy food. On the new kitchen table was a stack of documents. The deed to the building, a letter confirming all her debts had been paid in full, and a contract for her new position at Apple, detailing a salary that made her head spin. Her mother's photograph was no longer on a wobbly nightstand. It was in a beautiful silver frame, sitting on a solid oak dresser. Zara picked it up, her fingers tracing the smiling face. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We found the light." She went to her new desk, where her old, worn notebook was waiting for her. She opened it to a fresh page and wrote, her hand steady and sure. Today, kindness changed everything. 1 year later. The city looked different, or maybe it was just that Zara Fletcher saw it through different eyes. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her office on the top floor of the newly christened Fletcher Foundation building. Below her, the city hummed with life, a complex machine of dreams and struggles. She was no longer the tired girl in a diner uniform. Today, she wore a sharp, elegant business suit, a symbol of the new life she had built. But her eyes held the same compassion, the same deep well of empathy. Power hadn't corrupted her, it had amplified her. Her desk was not cluttered with corporate reports, but with grant proposals, community outreach plans, and architectural drawings. The alley, once a symbol of her humiliation, was now her greatest triumph. It had not become the entrance to a luxury condo. Marcus Thorne's project had collapsed into a mountain of lawsuits and bankruptcy. Instead, the alley and the adjacent lot had been transformed into the Fletcher Lab, a state-of-the-art public makerspace. It was a place where kids from all backgrounds could come to learn, to tinker, to build their own dreams. It was loud, chaotic, and full of the same vibrant, creative energy that had once filled Elias Vance. Elias, true to his word, had integrated his Kronos cell technology into Apple's product line, revolutionizing the world. But he spent most of his time now as a mentor at the Fletcher Lab, a wild-haired genius in a comfortable sweater, teaching a new generation that the greatest inventions often start with a little bit of junk and a lot of imagination. Zara was the president of the Fletcher Foundation, wielding her $89 million endowment with a wisdom beyond her years. She was a force in the city, a champion for the voiceless. The foundation had already housed over 500 homeless individuals, funded dozens of small, community-led projects, and provided scholarships for students like her, who had been forced to drop out due to circumstances beyond their control. Her story had gone viral, becoming a global phenomenon. The video of Thorne's arrogance and his subsequent downfall was a masterclass in ironic justice. But the part of the story that truly resonated with people was Zara's simple act of kindness. Her story inspired a movement. The city council, under immense public pressure and with a hefty donation from the foundation, had passed the Fletcher Act, a sweeping set of regulations that protected vulnerable communities from predatory developers and ensured public spaces were used for the public good. Zara was no longer alone. She had a team of dedicated, passionate people working alongside her. She had the friendship and mentorship of Elias Vance and Adira Sterling. She was a leader. She was a beacon. She was happy. That evening, as she was walking home, she took a detour through a small park. She saw a young woman sitting on a bench, her shoulders slumped in defeat, a portfolio of sketches open on her lap. The drawings were beautiful, full of raw talent and emotion, and Zara saw the same flicker of a dream in danger of being extinguished that she had once felt in herself. She could have walked by. She had a meeting to prepare for, 100 emails to answer. But she didn't. She sat down on the bench. "Those are amazing," Zara said, her voice warm and inviting. The young woman looked up, startled. "Oh, thank you. Not that it matters. I just got rejected from the Art Institute. Can't afford the tuition." Zara smiled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a simple pamphlet. On the front were the words, "The Fletcher Foundation." "I know a place that invests in talent," Zara said, handing it to her. "They believe dreams are worth fighting for. You should apply for a grant." The young woman's eyes widened with a dawning hope. "Really?" "Really," Zara confirmed. "My name is Zara Fletcher. Tell them I sent you." As she walked away, leaving the young artist staring at the pamphlet as if it were a winning lottery ticket, Zara felt that familiar, profound warmth spread through her chest. The cycle of kindness. It was the most powerful technology of all. Have you ever judged a book by its tattered cover? Have you ever walked past someone in need and looked away, telling yourself it wasn't your problem? Zara Fletcher didn't. She saw a human being, not a nuisance. She chose empathy over indifference. She chose to give when she had almost nothing. And in doing so, she didn't just change her own life. She changed a city. She proved that the most valuable assets we have are not stocks or properties, but compassion and integrity. She reminded the world that a single act of kindness can be the catalyst for a revolution. Now, go be someone's hero.